Okay, the agenda this week has also explored how women faced with adversity are banding together to change lives. We visited Russia to see how it's treating its neighbors and examined the conundrum that is modern Israel. The agenda's Week in Review begins with Ontario's new wage floor. Let's just start. $11 an hour. Is that the right number?
Historically, it's high compared to the past 50 years, where we've seen it in today's spending power range anywhere between about $8 to $10 and change since really the early 1970s. So $11 is quite a hit to take. We've been there before. I mean, 2010, when it was set to $10.25, that's more or less where it's going to be reset at that time. But at the same time, we've seen a decline in the number of young people with jobs in the province. And we're concerned that keeping the rate at that level is going to create some other unintended consequences of keeping young people out of the job market.
Sheila?
I think it's really important when we think about this to really take a step back and think about what the Employment Standards Act's role is. And really, as Anil said in his report, it's to set a minimum floor and to really talk about kind of how we live together. And I think what was really helpful about the campaign for $14 an hour is it really said that if you're working full-time, full year in Ontario in 2014, you should be above the poverty line. You shouldn't be at the food bank at the end of the month. You should be able to pay both, your rent and your food. So I think that's really the context to think about the 11. It's a good start. It's a good starting point.
You chaired the panel which actually did not make a recommendation on what the number ought to be. So we put that on the table with that admonition. But having said that, the government picked 11. What do you think of the number?
Well, the 11 number is basically a number that gives us the minimum wage that we had in 2010 in real terms. And if the government agrees to tie it to inflation, then what we would ensure is that going into the future, that the minimum wage will maintain its parity with inflation at the 2010 levels.
Okay, just explain to me how $11 today is the same thing as $10.25 4 years ago.
Because we've had the inflation has been about 7% and something, a little more than 7. So you go back to the 10.25 and you add 7.3% or whatever, and that gives you the $11. So very close to it.
So in effect, once you take inflation out of the mix, nothing's changed. Is that right?
So in real terms, yes, we are still at the same level that we were in 2010.
In which case was your campaign for not?
It wasn't my campaign, but I think what was really, really
Sorry,
important.
What do you mean it wasn't your campaign? You're on side with the campaign.
Absolutely.
You agreed with the $14 an hour.
I thought it was a really important conversation to have.
Okay.
I thought it was a really important conversation to open up that debate, and to open up that debate really about decent work.
But the province has landed on a number now which, when adjusted for inflation, is where we were 4 years ago.
So that's a disappointment. That's really a disappointment. And what would have been nice is if the government would have signaled not only did it want to maintain the real value of the minimum wage, but it did want to move that agenda forward. And it did that previously when it moved from $6.85 to $10.25. It did it in a series of steps and a series of stages that it signaled, which gave information both to employees and to the business community so that they could plan for it.
Well, Ted, let me ask you the flip side of that, which is if we really are today adjusted for inflation where we were back in 2010, nothing's changed for business, right? So presumably this will be reasonably easy to deal with?
From now on, and we don't have a problem with using CPI as a scaling indicator.
The inflation rate,
Consumer Price Index. It's well known. It's used in many other indexes and business practices. So certainty is actually a good thing. We're just wondering, is it right to have that particular level? Because there are trade-offs. Poverty is an important issue that we must deal with as a society, and it's an income issue at the end of the year, or at least it's the entire income for that time. But you're trying to deal with it on a per-hour basis, and it doesn't work very well. And I think all the studies, or many studies, that seem to have difficulty connecting minimum wage policy with poverty. Can we solve it with that particular issue?
Hold off on that for a second. We will come back to this issue of whether the minimum wage and raising it actually does anything about the poverty rates. But before we get there, again, Anil, I need just some basic information here. Let's say you're currently making because this doesn't go in until June 1st. So let's say you're currently making $10.75 an hour, which is 50 cents above the minimum wage in Ontario. When the new rate goes in June, do you continue to make 50 cents an hour above minimum wage, or will you just go to 11?
Well, that's up to the discretion of the employer. But what
won't
we
be
find,
any law about that.
No, there's no law about that. But what we find in practice, if you look at previous increases in other jurisdictions, what people find is that if you're very close to the minimum wage, you do get a bump almost equal to the minimum wage. But as you move up and away from the minimum wage, let's say 20% above, the effect of that kick dissipates as we go higher. So between 0, if you're just above, and up to 20%, you can expect a little bit of a bump in declining order. But once you're above 20%, like if you're double the minimum wage, you cannot expect a bump from the minimum wage going up to 11.
Let's see if we can understand what we are already hearing, maybe some of the consequences of this. And again, Ted, to you first. The immediate reaction we heard from business was, yes, happy about the predictability going forward, but in the interim, we're going to hire less and we're going to give less work to the people who are currently on minimum wage because we can't afford to pay more. Is that really true?
That's a simple characterization. I think it's a lot more complex than that. A business owner has to spin about 8 or 9 plates. They've got their product line, they've got their prices that they charge for their products, they've got all their input costs, of which wages are one of them. So government has now said, okay, I'm replacing this plate with one that's heavier. The businesses have to react somehow, and they can react in many different ways, whether it's cutting back on hours, restructuring their business so that they don't rely as much on relatively low-income people in their workplace. They'd rather go with perhaps more highly trained people that can do more of the work without being affected by the 7.5%.
Let's say you're running a restaurant.
It's juggling.
If you're running a restaurant, chances of hiring another waiter or waitress at this point would be less because of the increase in minimum wage?
A lot depends on whether they're able to or not. If you keep cutting back on the hours that you're actually working, or you have staff in the workplace, are you actually serving your customers as well? So they have, this again, they're spinning plates that they have to manage, and this is the complaint that you're hearing from businesses. They have to adjust somehow, and although perhaps we were telegraphed, this is going to happen, they still have to deal with it. They still have to deal with the employees who are earning $10.50, $10.75, and $10.95 per hour, who are now going to be saying, "Hey, wait a minute! I've had 2 years in this business, train. I'm more productive than someone who's now at the $10.25. Mm-hmm. Now you're all going to put me in the same category." So that's a discord that the employer now has to deal with in the workplace.
Can you help us understand this? I can't remember the dates exactly, but I'm guessing that Indira Gandhi came along 20 or 25 years before Canada had its first female prime minister. Mm-hmm. And yet, I think all fair-minded observers would say India has a much larger problem than Canada when it comes to treatment of women, misogyny, all of those kinds of things. So why is that? You got your first head of government way before we did, and yet it's worse there.
And I think she took a lot of measures. Actually, she did a lot of work with women who were in poverty. She tried to help them by creating small loans for them to come out of poverty. She helped people who were in bonded labor to come out of bonded labor. She helped women set up their own little businesses by giving them loans.
But she didn't change the minds of very many men about the role of women in society.
No, and in fact, I think part of, and she herself faced a lot of opposition from the men within her own cabinet. So, but I don't want to get into the political stuff. I think that is a situation in every country. I think India has changed in the context of, jobs for women. Okay, there's more growth, there's more literacy programs for women, but I think the attitude of men remains the same.
I've got, actually, a quote here I want to read to you on that very thing. Just last week, the leader of the Nationalist Congress Party that governs the Western Indian state of Maharashtra and a member of a government panel for women said rapes take place also because of a woman's clothes, her behavior, and her being at inappropriate places. Now, this is something nobody in Canada would say out loud in many years. Here's somebody still saying it.
Really? Do you really say that? But look back in our history.
A lot of people might think it, but
no
one would say that out loud today.
No, there was actually a judge in Alberta, if you remember, who said, you know, when a young woman went for a job interview, she was sexually attacked. And when the case went to court, he actually said, well, she provoked him because of the way she was dressed.
Yes, you're right.
So, yeah, you remember
There
that.
are exceptions, you're right.
So this is no different. So it happens everywhere. That's what I'm trying to say. And it happens at every level. I'm sorry.
Don't apologize. No, that's I'm asking because I want to hear your answers.
But that's the truth. And I'm going to go back to my time in Saskatchewan when, you know, I was involved with the Melford trial of a young Aboriginal girl who was only 12 years old, who was attacked by 3 men who together weighed 500 pounds. And she was sexually assaulted. And they got away. They all got away. So what I'm trying to say is the attitudes haven't changed, that the blame again was on the Aboriginal community and not on these men.
So Canada
and not
should not
about
be
changing.
so proud.
Yeah, I think we need to be very careful when we're pointing fingers that we ourselves get our, you know, our issues right, that we get our house in order. And I'm not saying that India is perfect. I think India has a long way to go, and particularly as it relates to, I go back to the attitudes of the male child, because the male child is seen as a gift. When a woman has as a boy in India, it's seen as a thing of pride. He's going to carry the family name, he's going to look after the family won't have to pay a dowry for him, but it's the other way around for a girl, right? That has slowly changed. But I don't know when the full change will come.
That's what I was going to say.
And we see that prevalent in Canada as well among the communities that we serve. It's still there. I'm sorry to say it still exists in our community.
But you've seen how far Indian society has come in the last 50 years, so how long do you think it will take before you get the kind of equality you're talking about?
What kind of moving forward? They moved forward in terms of trade, they moved forward in terms of, yes, some education and all, but they still haven't moved forward on issues related to the treatment of women.
How would you characterize Uganda's approach to maternal health?
Well, I think it's changing, and I think that's what I find most encouraging, is in the past it used to be, well, it was just fate. You know, it was too bad that she died. You know, they'd have a funeral, you'd be out in the rural area, mother would die in the village, you know, 400 people would join and come to her funeral. They'd eat chicken and go home. And it was, again, just this sort of sense of, you know, we couldn't have done anything. It was God's will that that happened. And you're thinking, well, no, it wasn't. What can we do differently? And I think that was really what helped to birth the Save the Mothers program, is how do we get politicians, religious leaders, local people, social scientists involved in safe motherhood, people who are in the media to talk about unsafe motherhood and bring about a change in people's expectations. In Canada, people don't expect that a mother's going to die of a pregnancy-related complication.
No, quite the contrary. We
talk
expect
about,
they won't.
Exactly. We talk about, you know, the services that I got at the hospital, whether people were friendly, whether they were on time, all those things, which are all very, very important. But in the developing world, that's not the case. Often the services just aren't available. And what can we do differently to make sure that those mothers get the care that they need? You know, you talked about the different complications of pregnancy and what kills mothers. We have a cure for all of those. We have a cure for all those. We don't have a cure for HIV/AIDS, and yet you see millions and millions and millions of dollars going into HIV care, and certainly there should be in the developing world, but it hasn't been really till the last 5 or 6 years that you're starting to see the global community talking about safe motherhood and really saying, you know what, this is intolerable. In the 21st century, 800 women today are dying. That's like 2 jumbo jets filled with pregnant mothers. And the other thing we don't talk about with that, too, Steve, is the fact that, yes, 800 mothers die, but hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of babies die as a result of that. We know that 4 million babies die every year in their first 7 days of life, and 4 million are born stillborn. Half of those babies die because their mothers were not cared for properly during delivery.
And I presume the women who give birth and die, it's not necessarily the first child that they're giving birth to? and therefore they are leaving other children behind when they die?
Absolutely. The average mother who dies leaves 4 children behind. So those 4 children are then caught in this cycle of poverty. And, you know, as we talk about development, sometimes people can get a little bit tired of hearing about development. What does that look like in the developing world? Well, focusing on safe motherhood, I think, is one of the most important tenets of development. Because when we save the mothers, it is the mothers who care for the immunizations of the child, they care for the education of the child. And if we want to stop the cycle of poverty, we put money and time into saving the mothers and making sure that they're well and healthy to look after their children.
Did you pick that name for the organization?
Save the Mothers? Well, it was actually another initiative that I was involved in the early days with the Federation of International Gynecologists and Obstetricians. But they decided to change their name to something else, and so I got permission to use it because I think it really says it all. But I think most people, when they think of me as an obstetrician, they think I'm over in Africa delivering babies. But again, because I realized I'm the last link in the chain. As a medical professional, I'm the last link. It's all the decisions that the mother needs to make. It's all of the provision that she is needing to get her to the hospital, to where I am, that we really need to focus on in addition to that last link.
That's key, isn't it? Because I guess, I mean, there are, I've talked to other doctors who volunteer and go all over the world and are right there, as you point out, as the last link in the chain. But if I understand what you're trying to do, you're talking about also educating society in a very different way.
That's right.
How does that have an impact on what you're trying to do?
Well, I think of Virginia Plan, who is visiting with me right now, even here in Canada. She's a school owner in Uganda, and she has taken our Save the Mothers program. It's a Masters of Public Health Leadership. And so she's taken this training over 2 years. It's modular, so she works and studies at the same time. And she and 300 other East African professionals have taken this program, and now she has transformed her school into a little safe motherhood machine where her kids sing and dance about safe motherhood. They go out into other schools and teach other kids. They speak to their parents about safe motherhood, and they themselves have become change agents. And as we look towards the future, it's young people like that whose expectations are different, that no, my mom should not die of a pregnancy complication, or no, my partner should not die of a pregnancy complication, because I'm going to make sure that they get the care that they need in time.
Since its inception as an idea, what Israel is has been changing. Journalist and author Ari Shavit has spent the past 5 years thinking about this. He's written a book about it. It's called My Promised Land, The Triumph and Tragedy of Israel, and we welcome him now to our studio. Welcome to Canada. It's very nice to meet you.
Pleasure to be here.
Your great-grandfather was a proper Englishman who visited a place called Palestine towards the end of the 19th century. Why did he make that trip, and what happened to him when he went there?
Well, I begin my book by asking that question, because my great-grandfather traveled from London in 1897 to Jaffa. Palestine was then a remote wasteland, desolate country, and you wonder, why would a successful lawyer travel from London, which was the capital of the world? He was affluent, everything was going for him. He was one of the very few Jews at that period of time had it good, and he was one of those privileged few. The conclusion I come when I wrestle with this question is that he and the other founders of Zionism had basically 2 great insights. One insight was that they realized at the end of the 19th century that modern Europe is becoming more dangerous to its Jews even than the old religious-based Europe.
He felt that in 1897?
Absolutely.
He did.
There was this notion that something evil is happening in Europe. So, as I write in the book, they did not know that there will be a Holocaust. They did not know that there will be Auschwitz. But they realized something evil is going to happen, and that Europe is becoming a death trap. And in this sense, what they tried to do by establishing a home for the homeless people the Jews were, was an astounding act of foresight, seeing danger coming and acting with a kind of determination and imagination years before the catastrophe happened in order to try to preempt it.
But you are candid enough to look at your grandfather's trip and say he got to Palestine and he did not realize or see that there were Arabs already there.
Absolutely.
How did he not see that?
Absolutely. And I think that this is you know, if you talk about the triumph and the tragedy. The triumph is the fact that the early Zionists were brilliant and I think so just. In this sense, I think that Zionism is the most just movement one can imagine, because it did not only try to liberate the people like other liberation movements, it tried to really save the people, and in many ways it did that by establishing this home for the Jewish people. But the other side is that there was an inherent flaw, in the sense that there were these other people, there were 500,000 Arabs at the time in the land. So I do not accept in any way those who claim that Zionism is colonialism, or my great-grandfather and the other founding Zionists never conquered a nation. Palestine was not politically established. The Palestinian people did not define themselves as a people. They were not conquistadors.
Well, they had no identity, did they, at that time?
And yet they ignored, yes, absolutely. One must realize that they came to a land that was chaotic. The region was chaotic, a bit like it is now. And there was, under the Ottoman Empire, there was no Palestine, and there were no other, most Arab nation states. They did not exist. And yet there was this flaw of not seeing the other. And my explanation is that that comes because of the fact that they were so desperate to establish this Jewish national home, and therefore they overlooked the existence of the others. And this is the tension that we live in, that on one hand, Israel is really a miraculous creation, and in my mind, really the most just and lively and striking entity one can imagine. And on the other hand, we have this ongoing conflict for more than 100 years, which is a very deep, deep conflict, multi-layered, so difficult to resolve, as we all see. And it does not begin just with occupation or settlements. It begins with the very fact that we did not see that they were there, and they were not willing to accept the fact that we are a Jewish people, that we have a right to have a Jewish home and Jewish state of our own, and that we belong to the land, that we are not some sort of Martians that came from another planet. And this is the basic blindness, which is again mutual blindness, that created the conflict. And this is why I believe that the conflict will eventually be resolved when we really acknowledge their existence and they will acknowledge ours.
Let's talk about two red-letter dates in Israeli history, 1948 and 1967. Whenever you hear discussion of Israel today, 1967 is almost where time starts, right? The Six-Day War and Israel in incredible fashion taking over much of the land of its neighbors, and then all of what's happened since then. Others say no, we really got to go back to 1948. What do you say?
I say that it's true that the most traumatic moment was 1948. And I think that many people on the Israeli left tried to avoid that point. And it was, in a sense, comfortable to believe that all the trouble started in 1967.
But they go back further, you think?
It goes deeper. And I think it's our duty to acknowledge the fact that the Palestinians have went through this terrible trauma, that their identity, their ethos is based on the catastrophe that they experienced years back. It is true, and yet what I say in the book, and I'm happy to have this opportunity to say it here, that I think we have to acknowledge, it's our duty to acknowledge the tragic past, but it's the Palestinians' duty to overcome it. Because in a sense, what I say to the Palestinians is, yes, I acknowledge that you went through terrible suffering and terrible pain.
They call it the catastrophe, 1948.
Yes, but one has to do two things. One is to put it in context. And the context is that the 1940s were brutal throughout the world. Now, I described the tragedy of Lida, the Palestinian city of Lida. Dresden was much worse than Lida. And no one says that Britain is illegitimate because of Dresden. So the 1940s, the war, and after the war. After the war, you had millions of refugees throughout Europe, in India and Pakistan. So the Palestinians should not be addicted to their sense of victimhood. If they are into the victimhood game, no one can beat the Jews in the victimhood game. No one can compete with us on that. So let them learn, in this sense, from the way we overcame our tragic past. Our past was so tragic, and yet we did not let the past poison ourselves, and we did choose life, and we did choose moving forward. And you know, one of the chapters I love in the book, if I may say, is the one describing the 1950s, when you have these hundreds of thousands of people who are almost human wrecks, who have nightmares at night, who have numbers tattooed into their arms, but they do not become suicide bombers. They don't hate the others. They don't even hate the Germans so much. Their revenge, their decision is to go for life, to educate their kids, to build a health system, to build fair housing, to build a social society. And this is the miracle of Israel. The people that have had all the excuses to be just traumatized by their past have said, no, we will not be traumatized by their past. We will choose life and we will move forward.
Last December, a twin bomb terrorist attack on the city of Volgograd in Russia claimed 34 lives and only buttressed fears that the Sochi Olympic Winter Games could be vulnerable to attack. Joining us now to examine these concerns and the tumultuous relationship between Russia and its neighbors, in Stanford, California, Catherine Stoner, Senior Fellow at the Freeman Spogli Institute for International Studies at Stanford University. In Waco, Texas, Serhiy Kudelia. He's Assistant Professor of Political Science at Baylor University. In New York, New York, Angela Stent, Director of the Center for Eurasian, Russian, and East European Studies at Georgetown University. And with us here in studio, Matthew Light, Professor at the Center for European, Russian, and Eurasian Studies at the University of Toronto. And it's great to have everybody on the program tonight as we consider one of the most significant issues in the world today. And let's just start, Catherine Stoner, with you in California. Based on what you've seen, heard, read, what you know, how safe is Sochi right now?
I think it's as safe as it's ever been. I think that people should exercise due caution. If they see something, say something. The danger here, of course, is the possibility of not just the normal craziness that can go on around any international sporting event, but the location of the Sochi Games is worrisome in that it's very close to a very restive region of Russia, the North Caucasus area, and specifically Chechnya and Dagestan, where Russia has been battling with Islamic insurgency for over a decade now. Almost 20 years.
Sorry, Serhiy Kudelia, I know this is a moot point at this point, but it's still worth asking. Do you think it was a wise decision for the International Olympic Committee, given everything Catherine Stoner just said, to have the Games in Sochi, Russia?
I do not think it was a wise decision. I think given how much attention now has been paid to the security in Sochi, given how much of resources the Russian government has spent on this ensuring security of Sochi, and given how many risks there are of terrorist attacks still, despite all of the resources spent, I think financially and from the standpoint of the safety of athletes and spectators, I do not think it was a wise decision to have to award Russia the Winter Olympics.
Matthew, would you weigh in on that, the advisability of having these games in that location at this moment in history?
Well, I'm afraid that although we still don't know what will happen at the Games, people's concerns in advance of them have to some extent been justified by the resurgence of terrorist activity, including the Volgograd incident that you mentioned. So, of course, we all hope that the Games go out without a tragedy or a terrorist attack, but there is cause for concern.
Cause for concern. Angela Stent, would you go further and say it was simply a mistake to put the Games here?
Well, Putin put everything into trying to get these games. Nobody thought actually that Russia was going to get the games in 2007, so he wheedled, cajoled, spoke in English, offered all these things. We also haven't mentioned that Sochi has a subtropical climate. You've seen a picture of all those palm trees there. So it's not only a very bad neighborhood, it's an inappropriate climate really for Winter Olympics. I think it's in the high 40s today, at least by the sea in Sochi. And then, of course, there's all the cost overruns, $51 billion they've spent constructing those facilities. So one hopes that these games go off well without a terrorist incident, but in retrospect, this was, I think, a typical Putin project to show that Russia was back, that Sochi was going to become a world-class tourist destination, and one wonders whether it will have been worth the expenditures on it.
Well, let me follow up on the terrorist angle with some of our other guests as well, and in doing so, I want to read a quote from earlier this last summer, I guess, from Doku Umarev, the Chechen Islamic militant, who said the following: "I call on you, every mujahid, either in Tatarstan, Bashkortostan, or on the territory of the Caucasus, to use maximum force on the path of Allah to disrupt this satanic dancing on the bones of our ancestors." Serhii, let me start with you on this. Does that kind of a call to arms to you suggest that an attempt at a terrorist attack is inevitable?
I would say that there would be an attempt to conduct a terrorist act either in Sochi itself or outside of Sochi, actually at any point, at any town in Russia. If we see an attempt to conduct a terrorist act or a terrorist act itself, that will create a lot of fear and add panic to the spectators and athletes in Sochi. We are seeing similar calls to arms, not only coming from the leaders of the Caucasus Emirate, but we're also seeing that on multiple jihadist websites, which are controlled by these numerous cells, terrorist cells that exist in Dagestan, in Ingushetia, in Kabardino-Balkaria, in all these small republics around North Caucasus, and they're being repeated basically every week with a clear message that the terrorists are ready, they have the capacity, and they show that they have a capacity with the Volgograd explosions. They have a capacity to conduct these terror raids, and they will do that at some point during the Olympic Games.
Catherine Stoner, this part of the world will, of course, be the most intensely guarded and potentially secure part of the world that exists over the next couple of weeks. And yet, in spite of that, do you fear that an attack is inevitable, given those comments from the Chechen Islamic militant leader?
I don't know that a successful attack is inevitable. It's unfortunately possible. I think an attempt is, or maybe several attempts, are probably inevitable. The Russians, as Angela mentioned, have put a tremendous amount of money, some of which has been stolen, of course, but have put a tremendous amount of money into these games and into security in particular. They've been aided to a small degree by a few other countries. The U.S. is nervous enough to have a ship in the Black Sea ready to evacuate American athletes as needed. That tells you something, I think. Unfortunately, I think the real danger here is that, Sochi has been under construction since 2007 and rather intensively in the last 6 months in particular. And my concern would be, now I know the main routes into Sochi are relatively well sealed, probably as well sealed as they're going to be. But the problem could be that militants have gotten in as construction workers and have had access to things like explosives for several months now and have been stockpiling them. And so that's a possibility. That is, terrorists are already there and undercover and will, try something as the games go on. We have reports that there are allegedly 2 so-called black widows, that is, relatives, women who are relatives of dead Islamic militants who have allegedly been spotted on the streets of Sochi. So I think that's, a real danger, is that potential terrorists are already there.
And that is the Agenda's Week in Review. You can see all of those programs in their entirety. They're all on our website, theagenda.tvo.org, on our iTunes channel, and on our YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/theagenda.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.